Damaged Defenders by Sherza. Chapter 16. Loki. Loki had expected a number of things from their trip to Asgard. He had expected the Midgardians to put forth a token effort at defending him. He'd expected to be judged guilty and then killed, or worse. He had not expected Tony to silence him before he could speak in his own defense, though we realized Tony had thought he would simply offer his plea rather than attempt to sway Odin. He had not expected a demand for the full story, and he most especially had not expected anyone to get it, if they had asked. He'd assumed that if it came up, the person that asked would get an edited account of what had happened. He hadn't expected the Midgardians' outrage on his behalf to be a palpable, almost visible thing, nor had he expected to see a mere mortal dressing down the Allfather like he was an erring child. Loki was going to treasure the Allfather's outraged bellow for the rest of his days. But Lewis? That young female was breathtaking. She was not, after all, a warrior. And while Loki had long since learned the folly of assuming a non-warrior was defenseless, Lewis was a mortal, facing off with immortals with powers she could not hope to possess. Watching her go on the warpath all the same had been a thing of beauty. She had been fierce and fearless in a way that no trained warrior could ever be, because warriors were trained to be fierce and fearless. This had been pure and raw, a force of nature unleashed. And then she topped it by turning her back on the Allfather like she knew she had nothing to fear, and not because of the warriors at her back, slipped back and into their protective cordon, and patted his arm, before murmuring to him, "Now when are you in off the deep end? What an asshole!" While Loki had always had his mother to rise to his defense, she had been his only consistent defender. Even Thor had failed him from time to time, so this was unique in his experience. To have people see the trials to which he had been subjected and disapprove. He wasn't quite sure how to handle it, to be entirely honest. Though he was more than slightly tempted to laugh at her insult to the Allfather. Frigga led them from the throne room herself, slipping her arm around one of his, which he bent automatically at her touch. Loki was familiar enough with the path they trod to be able to turn his attention to the others, and was forced to suppress his amusement. Rogers and Barton were staring at Lewis with dumbfounded awe and respect, respectively. Romanov had the sort of slit-eyed, pleased look on her face one saw on a cat after a successful hunt. Manor was snickering quietly. Stark hadn't put his faceplate up yet, so Loki was unsure of his reaction. Thor came up alongside Frigga, walking on the other side of her. "I do believe I misspoke, Mother, when I announced the Lady Darcy." There was more than little amusement in Thor's tone. "It would seem she is a true warrior at heart, as well as her other attributes." Much to Loki's surprise, Frigga made an ill-concealed noise of amusement. "Indeed, Thor, I'm quite inclined to agree. I have not seen the like since the Lady Sif beat up 3 young warriors in the training sala the first time she stepped into it." Loki barely choked back a laugh, mostly because he well remembered that day. Thor had been one of the ones Lady Sif had drubbed so badly. Mostly, it had to be admitted, because Thor had gone first, and had not expected the scrappy little girl Sif had been then to be any sort of challenge at all. Thor, though, had no reservations about laughing, then grinned widely. "Aye, that was a day to be remembered," he agreed. They were brought to the rooms they would be using for the night, and Frigga kissed both himself and Thor on the cheek before bidding them to summon a servant if there was aught they needed, and taking her leave. A few moments after she left, Stark finally lifted the faceplate of his helmet, and Loki discovered the true reason behind him keeping it down. Stark was positively howling with laughter. That got most of the rest going, and for several moments there was not but the sound of hilarity. Loki was amused to find himself trading exaggerated eye rolls with Romanov. Roger was the first to recover. He turned to Lewis, a grin still tugging in his mouth. "Miss Lewis, I don't blame you for losing your temper. I'm not even going to scold you for bawling Odin out, because you were right. We all agree with you. But if something like this happens again, please don't leave the safety of the group. If Odin had decided to try to hurt you, it would have been far too easy for him, and someone else might not refrain from attacking you." Lewis cocked her head at Rogers for a moment before nodding. "Fair enough." Foster reached out and smacked Lewis on the arm. "You are completely insane. You know that, right?" she asked. Stark finally calmed down enough for speech. That was beautiful, Lewis. I am seriously tempted to adopt you for that. I haven't seen that level of viciousness since the last time some idiot pissed off Pepper. Romanoff cocked an eyebrow at Stark. That idiot being you? Stark snorted. Yeah, no, not hardly. That would be Ross. Why do you think his reputation has tanked so suddenly in the last year when he'd been chasing Bruce for years before that without any damage to his reputation? Romanoff looked impressed. That was her doing? Stark nodded. She wanted to wreck his life the way he's wrecked Bruce's. I may not be building weapons anymore, but I still have a lot of military contacts. She used them. Lewis looked thoroughly discomfited by this, but also pleased. I'm just sorry I couldn't tase Odin myself. He deserves it. But the leads wouldn't reach that far. Loki stared at Lewis for a moment. I find myself disappointed, he said. The look on the Allfather's face would have been priceless had that happened. Agreed, Stark said, staring at Lewis again. I was Stark, Barton said. I like you! I'm gonna want to adopt you! You're almost as terrifying as she is! He indicated Romanoff. Thor was grinning like an idiot, one arm draped around Foster. Come, friends. There are some hours before nightfall and the need for rest. I will give you a tour of Asgard, if you would agree. Everyone else seemed to agree to that. Well, except Loki. I will remain. My welcome is likely to be poor, Loki said. Thor frowned at him. Nay, brother, you will walk with us. And to any speak ill of you in my hearing, they will earn a taste of my wrath. If there is aught I learned from my sojourn to Midgard, it is that there is more to life than combat, and skill in other areas should not be mocked. It is well beyond time such a lesson was learned by all in Asgard. Damn Thor anyway! The big lug still seemed determined to drown Loki in affection and protection. It both warmed him and chafed him at the same time. Knowing that Thor would be stubborn about this, and that the others seemed to agree with him, Loki gave in to the inevitable. There were some things that even Loki Silvertongue could not achieve. The tour went well enough. Only a handful of people dared to give Loki dirty looks or mutter about his presence. Thor was as good as his word, scowling viciously at the offenders, Mjolnir twitching in his grip. It was enough to subdue and silence all but the most impertinent and foolhardy. Most that approached them seemed fascinated by the Midgardians and content to ignore Loki in favor of sating their curiosity. The group returned to their assigned rooms and settled in for a night's rest, allowing Loki to finally have some peace and privacy in which to think. He had a decision to make. Oh, the decision to leave Asgard and not return until Odin was dust was easily enough made. The real question was where to go from there and what to do with himself. He had a number of options available to himself, even with the threat of Thanos hanging over his head. Given a week or so to fully recover from the last year, Loki knew he would be back to full strength, at which point he would be, if not able to defeat Thanos, then at the very least a formidable opponent. Loki might have limited himself to illusions and the like when he used his magic around other people, but he was capable of far, far more than that. That said, Midgard was proving to be a very tempting place to spend the next while. Thor would be there, at least until the danger of Thanos was past. If Thanos could be turned aside or defeated, that is. Possibly for the length of Foster's life, if their affections for each other remained true. Plus, Midgardians, while they still looked askance at persons who defied the norm for their gender, did not scorn and ostracize such persons uniformly across the realm. In many places, ignoring gender barriers was actively encouraged. Beyond that, intelligence and ambition were prized commodities, no matter one's gender, and tended to be richly rewarded in one capacity or another. Well, richly rewarded by Midgardian standards, at least. And considering there had been no reward, save for those he gave himself, Loki wasn't about to sneer at approbation from any quarter. The more Loki considered it, the more he realized the decision had been made. Midgard it was, then! The next morning, Thor, Loki, and the Midgardians joined the General Assembly at the morning meal. Loki noticed that Thor chose to sit beside him, well away from both his usual companions and scowling Odin. Once their fast had been broken, they removed themselves to the throne room once more. Loki had no idea what Frigga had said or done to Odin overnight, but he seemed to at least be making an effort to not deliberately antagonize the Midgardians this morning.
What further evidence have you?
Odin wanted to know.
To support your claims that Loki ought to face no consequences for his fell deeds.
The phrasing got him an irritated scowl from more than one of the Midgardians. Well, if we're done pointing out the many, many, many ways that lying to Loki about who and what he was wrong and bound to backfire horribly, Stark said, flashing teeth at Odin, and Loki knew, turning Odin's attempt to make Loki sound willfully guilty of everything that he was accused of back onto Odin. There's the fact that Loki was not exactly in his right mind when he was making those decisions, which means he shouldn't be held responsible. It's a little something called diminished capacity that we mere Midgardians take into account when bad things are done by people.
And you rest your claim of this diminished capacity on what?
Odin wanted to know. The fact Loki tried to commit suicide, Stark said. Loki flinched. Damn, he hoped that no one had picked up on that. See, according to Thor here, who was more or less eyeball to eyeball with Loki when it happened, Loki's hand didn't slip off the end of your spear there. He let go. And unless I'm missing something, he had absolutely no reason to think he'd survive a fall through the void. Anyone who's in the sort of frame of mind it takes to want to end their lives, not exactly thinking rationally, Stark said. And even if he was fully in his right mind when he made those decisions, he landed in the lap of this Thanos Joker, who proceeded to spend the next months torturing Loki and trying his damnedest to break Loki's mind. Granted, some shit went down, but I'm thinking Loki has paid the penalty for those actions several times over at Thanos' hands. Throwing him in jail or whatever you were planning is overkill. Odin scowled at them. Loki kept his expression bland, even as he wanted to smile. Odin doubtlessly realized that Loki's fate was ultimately out of his control. Through Heimdall and his ravens, Odin had seen what this particular band of Midgardians was capable of. Did they put their minds to it, they could reduce Asgard to rubble in a matter of days. And they were making it plain that they intended for Loki to be spared whatever judgment Odin had planned. The Allfather knew a lost battle when he saw one, even if it displeased him greatly.
Your argument is made, he growled. Loki, Odin...
Your pardon, Allfather, Loki interrupted, but I am not, and never have been, an Odin son.
He fought the desire to stare at the name.
Nor a Laufeyson, thanks to your actions. It would seem that I have no father.
He looked at Frigga, the only parent he was willing to claim.
It is tradition in Asgard, if the father of a child is in question, for the child to take the mother's name. If it please Queen Frigga, I will hereafter be known as Loki Friggason.
Frigga gave him a brilliant smile.
It would please me greatly, my son,
she said, then slid a look at Odin that was pure, smug pleasure. Odin looked as though he had swallowed glass.
So be it! Loki Friggason, you are hereby not found guilty of the crimes of which you stand accused and are free to go.
There was a brief cheer from some of the Midgardians. Loki gave the Allfather a nod and then turned and walked out. The Midgardians were quick to follow him. So I say we blow this joint, Stark says, and get back home. There was general agreement from the rest of the Midgardians.
Allow Thor and myself a bit of time to pack some of our things, so we need not return to Asgard unexpectedly, and we can leave. I confess I shall be glad to see the back of this realm,
Loki said. The Midgardians agreed to that, and Loki made haste to his rooms to pack his things. Not for the first time was he grateful for his skill at magic, else he would have never been able to pack even a tenth of what he had collected over the years. Loki packed a few baubles or mementos. He had few in the first place. He packed no clothing, as he would stand out in Asgardian attire. His armor, of course, did not need to be packed, as it went wherever he did. The bulk of what Loki packed was books. A formidable library of magical texts, histories for the various realms, and various treatises on subjects outside of magic that had caught Loki's interest over the years. The remainder of his luggage was weapons and a few aids and anchors he needed for more complicated magics. It all fit into a single trunk. His unpacking done, he went to rescue Thor, who was doubtlessly making a mess instead of packing. Sure enough, when Loki walked in, Thor's rooms looked as if they'd been attacked, Thor's belongings strewn hither and yon. Loki shook his head.
Brother, you truly need a keeper.
He sighed at Thor, who looked abashed.
Here, allow me to assist.
It was the work of moments to modify one of the trunks Thor had pulled out the way Loki had modified his own trunk. Then Loki sorted through the wreckage.
No clothing, Thor. We will be on Midgard, and it behooves us to dress as they do outside of battle. Bring your extra weapons as well. You may end up needing them.
Thor got himself straightened out after that, and got everything he wanted to take with him packed. 15 minutes later, they rejoined the Midgardians and made their way to where Heimdall stood watch, the container holding the Tesseract in his hands.
Gather in a circle, as you were when you arrived,
Heimdall instructed in his deep voice.
With the Tesseract returned to us, the Bifrost will be rebuilt within a few weeks. If you have need of assistance, I will be watching.
Everyone gathered into the tight circle they'd been in when they left Stark Tower, and Heimdall activated the Tesseract. Loki squeezed his eyes shut against the bright light of being transported, and when he opened them, they had returned.
Welcome home, sir,
Jarvis said seconds later.
Much has transpired in your absence.
Stark snorted. I just bet it did.